When he tied her wrist with a fraying rope and handed her to the young man, not a single soul in the village blinked. They had seen worse things done for a sack of coins, but this was different, because the woman didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't even look back at the man she had once called husband. She simply walked away barefoot through the dust, her silk scarf slipping from her shoulder. Her eyes locked on the boy who now held the other end of the rope. He was just 20, skin smooth, barely marked by sun or sword, the kind of face that hadn't seen enough of the world to be cruel, yet somehow had become the owner of a woman twice his age. She was 35, radiant like a monsoon moon, with deep-set eyes that told tales no man had ever heard aloud. Her name was Naila. No one in the village spoke it anymore. The marriage was rushed, a quiet ceremony at the edge of the date orchard, attended only by the boy's mother, an old Mulvi whose eyesight had long gone, and the wind that carried whispers farther than people dared to walk. The boy, Rami, was the only son of a dying textile trader. He had inherited more cloth than courage, and when Naila stepped into his mud house, even the walls seemed to tremble under the weight of her silence. She didn't speak for the first 3 nights, cooked, cleaned, and slept with her back to him. Rami, unsure whether to touch her or thank her, kept waking at night, listening to the sound of her breath, slow, steady, unforgiving. He wasn't cruel, just naive. Thought she would smile one day, maybe even laugh. But there was something behind her eyes that scared him more than war ever could. A week later, the whispers began. She's expecting already. Must be from the old one, the man who sold her. The midwife confirmed it with a quiet nod and lowered eyes. When Rami found out, he stood outside the house for 2 hours, staring at the sky as if expecting God to answer a question he didn't dare ask. Inside, Naila swept the floor and tucked her hair behind her ears with trembling fingers. That evening, Rami didn't come home. The next morning, Naila found him at the graveyard, sitting beside a broken tombstone. He didn't say a word, just looked up at her with eyes red from smoke or shame and said, "I won't ask whose it is, but I'll raise it like mine." Something shifted that day. Not in Naila, but in the world around her. The sky grew clearer, the wind softer, even the water from the well tasted less bitter. She began to speak small things at first. The flowers low, you forgot your turban. Then stories Hafleys fully told while cooking lentils or hanging clothes. Rami listened, like a student before a prophet. And slowly, very slowly, the cracks in her heart stopped bleeding. But not everyone was willing to forget. The old husband, Shan, returned one night, drunk, torn, barefoot, screaming her name into the dark. He demanded her back, said he had only lent her, said the money was for debt, not for divorce. Rami stood in the doorway with a lantern in hand, Naila behind him, her hand on her belly, her eyes fixed not on Shan but on the knife hanging from the doorpost. "Leave," she said. Shan laughed, spat, and walked into the night, but he didn't leave. For days, things were quiet, too quiet. The birds stopped nesting near their home. The neighbors stopped speaking. One morning, the tethered goat was found with its throat cut, a warning. Then the midwife disappeared. Then Naila began to see footprints beneath the window. Rami began sleeping with the door bolted and a stick beneath his pillow. Then, one evening, while lighting the stove, Naila found a bundle tucked in the ashes, a child's shoe, burned at the toe. Rami rushed to the village council, but no one listened. Shan had been one of them once, a trader, a fighter, a friend, and Naila, she was still the woman who'd been sold, still the woman whose past refused to drown. Then came the night of the fire. The house burned like a funeral pyre, but only half of it, the other half where Naila had been sleeping, remained untouched. A miracle, some said. A warning, said others. And inside that smoky ruin, a secret was revealed. Rami, coughing blood, dragged out a scorched sack. Inside were letters, dozens, all written by Shan, not to Naila, but to someone else. Another woman, another family, a second life no one had known. He had betrayed her long before he sold her. That night, Naila didn't weep. She held her belly, stared at the stars, and whispered something into the wind that even Rami didn't understand. A week later, Shan's body was found by the river. Not cut, not broken, just gone. His eyes open, a coin on his tongue, a curse fulfilled. No one claimed him. No one mourned. And when Rami asked Naila if she knew what it meant, she simply said, "Some debts are paid by silence." 9 months passed. A child was born. A girl with eyes like dusk and fists that curled as if already fighting the world. Rami named her. Sana. Naila smiled for the first time. The village changed. Slowly, quietly. Some began to greet them. Some even sent bread. Rami opened a small shop. Naylor began teaching herbs to the young girls, how to stop bleeding, how to calm a fever, how to bury pain without burying truth. One evening a girl knocked on her door, said she was Sean's daughter from the other woman, orphaned, hungry, afraid. Naylor stared at her for a long time, then opened the door wide. That night, they sat beneath the same roof, two daughters of the same betrayal, and Naylor told her stories not of hate, but of healing, of what it meant to rise from dust and still choose to bloom. The village listened from a distance, and years later, when Sana stood before the same council and spoke of justice, of love, of sacrifice, they listened out because now they remembered, not the woman who was sold, but the woman who saved others from being bought, and they whispered her name again. Nayla, the woman who turned silence into salvation. The rains came late that year, and when they finally arrived, they did not bless the village with mercy. They came like an old grudge, slow, heavy, unrelenting, flooding fields, loosening rooftops, and drowning the hopes that had only just begun to rise. The mud walls of Naylor and Rami's home swelled and cracked, but they held. The wooden shop Rami had built collapsed in the first storm. Still, he didn't complain. He tied what goods he could salvage in oilcloth, and began again, but it wasn't. The rain that tested the myth was the whispers that returned with it. This time, they came not from bitter tongues, but from a new face in the village. His name was Wasif. He arrived with a caravan of grain traders seeking shelter until the roads cleared, tall, quiet, and cloaked in the kind of silence that made people lean in to listen. His smile was sharp, but his words were careful, respectful. He rented the abandoned watchman's house across from Rami's burnt shop, and within days he knew more about the village than those born in it. He saw Naylor on the second day. She was returning from the riverbank, her daughter Sana clinging to her arm, her headscarf soaked from washing clothes. Their eyes met only for a moment, but it was enough. Wasif looked at her like someone staring at a story he'd heard once, but never believed was real. Later that week, he came to the herbal stand where Naylor sat stringing seeds into sachets for fever remedies. He didn't speak right away, just stood, watching the precision of her fingers. "You're the woman they talk about," he said finally. "The one who was sold." Naylor didn't flinch. She tied the sachet and handed it to a passing girl before lifting her eyes to meet his. "I was the woman people silenced," she replied. "Now I listen more than I speak." He smiled then, not mockingly, not like the others had, but with a curiosity that felt dangerous. Rami saw it at first. He tried to ignore it, but Wasif kept returning, brought strange herbs from the north, and asked Naylor about their properties. Sat beneath the neem tree near her stall for hours, asked questions no outsider should dare ask. Rami watched his wife retreat inward against speaking less, staring more. She said nothing was wrong, but she walked slower at night. She checked the latch twice before bed. One night, Rami followed Wasif. He trailed him past the village boundary to the edge of the flooded ravine, where he saw him speaking with a man wrapped in a red shawl. He couldn't hear the words, but he saw the way Wasif handed him something, a letter, a map, and the way the other man pointed toward the village. The next morning, the fields closest to the village were slashed. The wheat that had survived the flood now lay flattened like someone had stomped through it with fury. And then the rumors began again, that Naylor had known Wasif before, that he was the father of her child, that Rami was merely a stand-in, a shadow. The words came like windsoft but sharp, cutting through everything they'd rebuilt. Rami confronted her beneath the neem tree, his voice shaking more from pain than rage. "Is there anything you haven't told me?" Naylor's face held no surprise, only sorrow. "I knew someone like him once," she said quietly. "Before Shan, before I was sold." He stared at her, fists clenched. "Wasif, no," she said. "But someone like him, smooth words, sharp mind, hands that knew how to offer help without leaving fingerprints. That kind of man leaves marks you can't see." Rami turned to go, but she grabbed his hand. "He's not here for me, Rami. He's here for something else. I just don't know what." 2 days later, Sana disappeared. She had been playing in the alley behind the well with 2 neighbor girls. They said a tall man gave her a sugar cube and pointed toward the trees. Panic erupted. The whole village turned into a search party. Rami ran through the fields barefoot, calling her name until his voice gave out. Naylor tore through the forest, thorns slicing her hands. Her scarf lost to the wind. At dusk, they found Sana by the abandoned shrine at the hill's edge, crying, barefoot, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. She had not been harmed, but her eyes were wide with fear. "He said Mama had secrets," she whispered. "He said she used to live where the sky touches the mountains, and that she was never meant to stay here." The paper was a drawing, a crude sketch of Naylor's face. Below it, 2 words written in red ink: return her. That night, Nayla sat by the hearth, staring at the flames. I was born in a mountain tribe, she said. Taken as a child during a raid. My real name wasn't Nayla, it was Zuliha. Rami listened without blinking. I escaped. I thought no one would ever find me. Then I met Shan, he promised me safety, but he sold me instead. And now the tribe wants me back. Why now? Because of Sana, they believe bloodlines matter. They believe she belongs to them. Rami stood, fists trembling. They can't have her, Nayla looked up. Then we run, but they were too late. The next morning Wasif was gone, and so was the path to the mountains. It had flooded overnight, cutting off any chance of escape. They were trapped. The village held a gathering. Some wanted to hand Nayla over, said she brought misfortune, said her past had cursed the harvest, the rain, the fire. Others stood by her women who had lost sons, daughters, dignity. They saw in her the kind of strength that shame could not kill. The council was divided. Then, Sana stood in the middle of the crowd, holding the drawing. He said, "My mother is stolen," she said, her voice clear. "But she saved me from the rain, from fire, from fear. She's not stolen, she's given." And the winds shifted. A decision was made. Nayla would not be handed over, but the village would send a message to the mountains. We will not return what we have rebuilt. The next week was tense. At night, drums echoed from the hills. Fires burned in the distance. Rami stood guard every night, spear in hand. The villagers took turns watching the borders. But no attack came. Only a single rider, cloaked in blue, arrived with a basket of seeds. For the child, he said, to grow what cannot be taken, then turned and rode away. Nayla took the seeds and planted them beside the Nime tree. Every evening, she watered them with her own hands. Even when her fingers ached, even when no one watched. The first bloom came in silence, a red flower, wild and defiant, pushing through the dust. And in that moment, Nayla knew the tribe would not return, not because they had surrendered, but because they had seen something stronger than fear. A mother who had already given her blood once, and would not bleed again, and a village that had finally chosen to protect what once they had sold. That season passed with the weight of centuries behind it, and in its place came a quieter time, a time when the villagers began to look Nayla in the eye, not as the woman who was sold, but as the woman who had stayed. Rami rebuilt his shop, brick by brick, each wall sturdier than before, not just from stone but from resolve. Nayla returned to her herbs, her quiet teaching, her slow healing of others and of herself. Sana grew taller, braver, asking fewer questions but watching everything. The red flowers by the neem tree spread without being invited. Children began to pick them for their mothers, but calm is never the end of the story, in a land where people remember too much and forgive too little. It began with a letter. No one saw who delivered it. It was found hanging by a thorn on the corner of Rami's door, sealed with wax and stamped with the mark of a forgotten clanner, mark Nayla recognized before she even touched it. 3 arrows crossing a circle. She opened it with slow fingers. The words were not written in the village tongue, but she understood them like a knife understands the flesh. It was a summons, not a threat, a call to judgment. The mountain tribe was gathering again, not to reclaim her but to put her on trial. It made no sense. Years had passed, she had fled, been sold, reborn, but tribal law had no expiration, and to them she was not just a runaway. She was accused of betrayal, of revealing sacred herbs to outsiders, of mingling blood with foreign soil, of bearing a daughter who did not belong to their gods. They called it a violation of the sacred covenant, and they demanded her presence before the first full moon. Rami tore the letter apart. "We owe them nothing," he spat, but Nayla did not answer. Instead, she walked to the old shrine where Sana had once been found, knelt before the cracked stone, and wept for the first time since the night her house burned, because she knew this was not a decision the village could make. This was hers alone. 4 nights, she didn't sleep. She braided Sana's hair, cleaned her sandals, stared into the fire until her eyes burned. Rami watched her unravel slowly, as if each hour pulled a thread from her ribs. He tried to hold her, to reason with her, but Nayla had already decided. "I must go," she said. "To what end? To face what I ran from, to bury it, or be buried by it?" Sana screamed when she heard. "You said you would never leave again." Nayla knelt and held her tight. "I will return," she whispered, "and if I don't, you will still bloom." But Sana wouldn't let go. "Then I'm coming to— No, I'm not a child anymore." "She's right," Rami said quietly. "She has your blood. Let her stand with you." It was madness. But sometimes madness is the only honesty the world understands. And so, on the morning of the full moon, they left, Naila, Rami, and Sana, 3 souls walking toward a mountain that had once swallowed her whole. The path was long and steep, the air thin, and the silence filled with memories that crawled up her spine. Birds flew lower there. Even the sun hesitated behind the cliffs. At the entrance of the tribal valley stood 12 men in bone-colored cloaks. Their leader was old, hunched, eyes pale with judgment. He did not greet her. He only pointed toward the center ring where trials were held not with questions, but with chants and fire. The people gathered slowly. Some remembered her. Some only remembered the story of her disappearance. They called her many names: traitor, witch, woman of a... She stood in silence while Sana held her hand like it was the last rope on a crumbling cliff. The trial was not spoken, it was sung. Verses of law, curses of the old tongue, witnessed by fire and stone. The accusations were clear: abandonment, revelation of sacred knowledge, defiance of lineage. Then she was asked to speak. Naila stepped into the center. Her voice did not shake. I left because you left me first. You took my name, my childhood, my body. You made me a vessel for your pride. And when I saw what freedom felt like, I chose it. You call it betrayal. I call it life. They listened, but they did not soften. Then the eldest pointed at Sana. And what of the child? She is mine, but not ours. She is no one's property, Naila said, her voice now a blade. She is my retribution. A hush fell over the valley. Then, to everyone's shock, Sana stepped forward. I am not afraid of your laws, she said, facing the elders. I've seen your cruelty in drawings. I've read your shame in letters. And I've watched my mother plant life where you gave her only ruin. One of the younger men whispered something to the elder. A decision was made. They would not punish Naila, but they would never accept her either. She was to return and never set foot in the valley again. Her bloodline would not be honored. Her name would not be spoken. She was to be erased from their stories. Rami stepped forward. You think silence is punishment? We built a life in silence. We raised a child in silence. We loved her in silence. Then he looked at Naila. But now you speak, and they can't undo that. They turned to leave, but the elder stopped them one last time. There is a cost to walking away twice. He handed Naila a small pouch. Inside were seeds, the same red flowers she had planted by the neem tree. From the mountain cliffs, he said. They only grow where blood has fallen. Naila took them, and as they descended, she scattered them along the path one by one, not to grow, but to mark her return, not to them, but to herself. The journey back from the mountains was slower than the climb, not because their bodies were weak, but because the silence between them had thickened. Each step felt like a page being turned in a book that none of them wanted to finish. Sain walked ahead, her braid heavy with dust and wind, her eyes older than her years. Rami followed behind, his hand resting on the hilt of a blade he had not needed but had carried anyway. Naila walked in the middle, the pouch of red seeds clutched tightly in her palm, each seed pressing into her skin like a memory that refused to fade. The village looked different when they returned. Not physically. The same cracked walls, the same flickering lanterns at dusk, but something had shifted in the air. People stared a moment longer, nodded a little lower. The tale of her trial had reached before they did. And in it, Naila was no longer the woman who was sold. She was the woman who stood trial and did not bow. The children came running first, curious, barefoot, trailing questions like fallen leaves. Sana smiled for them, even though her soul was still wrapped in the cold of the mountain shadows. Naila said little. She went straight to the neem tree and sat beneath it. In her lap, she poured the red seeds onto a folded cloth and began sorting them by shade. Rami said nothing. He simply placed water beside her, then returned to the shop, his eyes scanning the horizon, always watching. For days, Naila planted in silence, one seed per evening, each pressed deep into the soil with her thumb, watered with the same tin cup, and whispered too softly. Some said she was trying to forget the mountain. Others said she was preparing for something, but no one dared interrupt her until the boy arrived. He came at dawn, limping from the north, dressed in a threadbare tunic, skin sunburned and lips cracked. He said nothing at first, just stared at the neem tree, at the red petals beginning to sprout from the earth. Naila watched him from a distance, something tightening in her chest she hadn't felt in years. He collapsed before noon. They carried him to her hut. His body was fevered, trembling, near death. Naila crushed herbs, bathed him in cool cloth, fed him broth in small sips. For 2 days he drifted between here and somewhere far beyond, whispering things in a dialect she hadn't heard since her first steps in the mountain village. On the third day, he woke Dad. His name was Adiel 14. An orphan, he had escaped a clan war in the far northern valleys. Said he had heard stories of a woman who healed, a woman who once belonged to the mountains but lived near a tree that grew red flowers. I didn't believe it, he said, eyes wide. But I needed it to be true. Sana brought him water, Rami brought him shoes, Naila brought him her silence, which in time he came to understand as comfort. But Adil was not just a lost child. He had a mark on his shoulder, 3 faint scars in the shape of a crescent moon. A mark once given to children chosen for tribal apprenticeship in the sacred arts of healing and war. A mark Naila had once carried herself, though hers had faded with time and salt and fire. When she asked him who gave it, his face darkened. My sister, he whispered. She was taken, and I ran. That night, Naila walked out into the fields. The stars blinked low in the sky, the wind whispering secrets only she could hear. She knelt beside the newest red bloom and wept not for the boy, but for the child. She had once been the girl who had no one to run to, the girl who was sold, not saved. Rami found her there before dawn. They will come looking for him, he said quietly. I know. Do we hide him? No, she said.